Dr. Wayne Mapp.
Mr. Chair, just to summarise what those two very good speeches, in fact, have in part covered, as was noted, Part 1 of the bill establishes the purpose of Parts 1 and 3 of the bill, which is to regulate auditors who carry out audits. That regulation is primarily, in fact, done by licensing process. Now, I should note that the bill originally only provided for the licensing of auditors. The committee recommended that it be broadened to allow for the registration of audit firms that include at least one licensed auditor. This change recognises that the quality of auditing depends both on the adequacy and effectiveness of the firm's policies and procedures and the expertise of individual practitioners. Can I also note that this is an issue that's been widely recognised across the House, and I note that all parties are supporting it for the reasons that have been well stated by the two previous speakers. Thank you.
Members, we come to the vote on the If the member wants to call, must call out. Claire Curran.
Mr. Chair, apologies, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to return to Part 1 of the bill, and one of the major issues that I'd like to address, while this is all about, as my colleague Stuart Nash has referred to, this is about enhancing confidence in New Zealand's financial markets and the absolute importance of doing that. But one of the things that we have to do to get that confidence in the financial markets is to actually ensure that the people who are investing actually know what they're investing in and have an understanding and a knowledge of the financial markets, which is the bit that's really missing in this bill and in all of the accompanying bills. And the question has been put to the Minister, and I wouldn't mind hearing an answer from the Minister on this issue in all readings of this particular bill and all of the other bills that have accompanied it, which is around financial literacy issues. And the importance of this issue is critical, because it's not just around how the markets operate, because they don't operate on their own as somehow off there, in the ether somewhere. It's actually people that invest in them, and it's how people are investing them and their understanding of them, which is one of the reasons, which is why the Financial Markets Authority has been established, to try and create more fairness in the system. But the bit that is missing, as I've said, is about the understanding that people have of how the markets operate and the trust that they can have in the information that they're being given. And in order to have that trust, they actually need to understand more about how the markets work. And I'd just like to read, because I think it does have a reference to Part 1 of the bill, around some of the work that their Retirement Commission has done, because they have done quite a lot of work around this issue, and if the Minister feels moved to respond, that would be quite good in terms of the thinking that the government's got in this area. And what the Retirement Commission said was that in their National Strategy for Financial Literacy, which was dated November 2010, so it's quite recent, was that with involvement from many individuals and organisations across the public, private and voluntary sectors, New Zealand's National Standard for Financial Literacy was launched in June 2008. And that strategy set the direction for improving financial literacy in New Zealand and provides a range of approaches to achieve this improvement. And its focus is on developing the quality of financial education and extending its delivery and sharing what works and working together. And those strategies together is going to help achieve our goal of a financial literate population. And it would seem to me that if you've got a financial literal population and you've got good laws in place, which are strengthened by the establishment of the Financial Markets Authority, by this bill and all of the other bills that accompany it, then you're actually starting to cook with gas, so to speak. But as I said, I think that the bit that's missing, and it's come across on so many occasions in every speech that's been given on this bill, particularly on this side of the House, is that, you know, you can have the best legislation in the world, and you can have good intentions, but you can still have dodgy practitioners out there that are trying to work their way around it, and you've got a population that isn't necessarily hugely financially literate. And I know that in a previous speech on this bill, my colleague, the Honourable David Parker, actually talked quite a lot about this issue and how the complexity of this sort of legislation, and, you know, coming from a legal background, he'd know all about that, but how the legislation, Mr Chair.
Clear, Karen.
How this legislation is so complex, and the legislation that accompanies it, is that it's extremely difficult for the ordinary mum and dad investor or person out there in the community who's got a bit of money. Those people are declining right now, but who have got a bit of money and want to invest, who actually can understand it. And the other issue that's been touched on as well is about the truth in advertising issue, which again was brought up again and again in the Select Committee as being an issue where you've got celebrity endorsement of financial products, and ordinary people trust the celebrity and what they're saying about it. And when it's found to crash and they lose all their money, that this is an extremely important issue for the ordinary person. So I'll go back to the National Strategy for Financial Literacy, because I would like to know what the government actually thinks about it and whether they're committed to it and what they're doing to support it, and how important this is in terms of an adjunct or a complementary strategy that must go with this legislation. They said that the worldwide economic downturn and finance company collapses in New Zealand have highlighted the importance of financial literacy. It's high on the agenda in New Zealand and internationally. Well, it might be high on the agenda in New Zealand when we have organisations like the Retirement Commission, which is a pretty important organisation, turning up to the Select Committee and saying that it's important. But what I'd like to see is where the government actually thinks that this is important and what they're doing to support it. Around the world, they say, the impact of the crisis on ordinary people has created what we call a, quote, teachable moment, unquote, for financial literacy, where people are more aware that they need to manage their money well. But unfortunately, their knowledge of how to do it is patchy. And although they say the ANZ Retirement Commission's Financial Knowledge Survey in 2009 showed some improvement over the same survey in 2006, it's a reminder that we still have much to do. And there was little change in the number of New Zealanders with a low level of financial knowledge. And I'd like to say, Mr Chair, to the Minister, that that is critical. If there's no change happening in the financial literacy side of the equation, and, well, where are we going to see an improvement in this issue? And you know, people are important, I guess, is the message here. The survey also highlighted gaps in knowledge in areas for improvement, with low income or less education not necessarily being predictors of low financial literacy levels. The take-up of financial education is varied at school level and beyond, and you've got to ask yourself why that is, whether it's because it's not being taught, or there isn't enough emphasis on it, and that the importance of this issue isn't actually flowing through into the rest of society and through our economy. Evaluation of what works best in terms of delivery is still being developed. And as we look for ways to help New Zealanders understand more about the increasingly complex and challenging financial environment, they've revised the strategy to ensure it's relevant today. And I'd like to know what the government's doing about that. And I think one of the really good examples of that is the evidence of loan sharks and the impact that they're having in Auckland, and how, with reference to Part 1 of the bill, Mr. Chair, that this really underpins the importance of this legislation and why we're having it, and why financial reporting, while it's hugely important to investors, regulators and other financial market participants in how the resource allocation decisions are made, there's also an extremely important issue around financial literacy for New Zealanders.
Members, we come to the vote on the Minister's amendments as set out on SOP number 239. The question is that the amendments be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Part 1 as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now come to Part 2, debate on clauses 10 to 71. The question is that Part 2 stand part.
Mr. Chair.
Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Part 2 is, I suppose, the